I started a relationship with the camera, a camera, when I was like 8 years old, even before. And it became an obsession, and first a hobby, then an obsession, the camera. I always had a camera with me. Um, so early on, I had a documentary impulse. You can say at 16, I went up to the high Arctic on a ship. I had my camera with me. And I was told if I did a good job, maybe my photographs would be published. So I was documenting that journey on this ship up north. I wanted to meet Inuit, Eskimo at that time, and so I started to photograph with a sense of documenting. From that, I had seen lots of films, and it was actually probably we had a Bolex camera in the house, so I was doing a little bit of movie shooting with the film camera. And then friends at universities that were older than me started studying film, and I would shoot their films. So it was the beginning of cinematography. And then I became a photographer and a cinematographer. And then eventually I wanted to make my own films, so it came out of cinematography that led me to making films. And I was always interested in documentary and filmmaking in general, so that's how it evolved. You know, why I started making films is the first sort of photographer. I made a film about Paul Strand, a famous photographer and filmmaker, radical filmmaker. And I went to see him, and as a young photographer, but I wanted to make a film. And he said to me, you know, it's not about just taking pictures, making images. The question is, what do you have to say about the world? So I walked out of that meeting saying, ooh, yeah, what do I have to say about the world? So he was encouraging me to develop a voice. What is my voice going to be? What do I have to say? You know, it was almost giving me permission to have a voice. So that was the beginning of a journey in filmmaking, is to find my voice, to find out what it was I wanted to say about the world. And that's where filmmaking began. Well, Arctic Defenders is a complex film, as a lot of films are. I made a previous film called Passage, which was a look at 19th century British imperialism in the North. It's a story about the Northwest Passage and the role that the Scottish and explorers had taken in finding John Franklin, the famous expedition, and how the Inuit had been maligned by Lady Jane Franklin and Charles Dickens. And in that film, I wanted Inuit perspective, you know, and I met Taga Curley, who plays a very central role in that film. So we got to know each other, and through that, he told me his own story about this political movement that he and others had started in the late 60s. There was a renewed consciousness for human rights around the world, globally, but it was filtering into the North as well, I guess. Although I don't even know if Taga was aware of these things. But so it was my meeting with Taga and telling the story of this political movement to reclaim the culture and heritage of Inuit. So that was an inspiration to really almost make a companion film to that first film. And this film deals with Canadian imperialism in the North in the 20th century, and the Inuits' response to that, and how they turned the tables around and achieved not only a movement, but the largest land claim in Western civilization, and the creation of a new territory of Nunavut, a new political territory under their guidance. And, you know, when I went north, 16, got on a ship and traveled, you know, 2,000 kilometers north, it opened my consciousness on many levels. It opened up a consciousness about the size of this country, the space of this country. I went up when we had just celebrated the 100th anniversary of Canada, Expo 67. This was 1968. So going north and meeting people, meeting Inuit, who had been living in this place for some 4,000 years before the time of Christ, opened up my sense of this country in terms of people living here, the culture that exists here, that went way beyond 100 years. So that really opened up my imagination in terms of a sense of history. I was also supported by a grandmother who believed in history and culture and mythology, the importance of mythology. She introduced me to our, I've come from an Irish and Scottish heritage, and she introduced me to mythologies and stories that were, again, pre-Christian, that go back thousands of years, oral tradition, poetry. So these two things started to come together with a sense of this country of Canada as a vast space with ancient cultures living here, way beyond the sort of European influence, and that's really stuck with me. So I became really interested in culture and history, and in opening up expanding this consciousness, in the films that I make. So I choose subjects that I hope that people can see the world in a slightly different way. And the reason I chose documentary as a form is that I sort of see documentary as it's a later development in cinema, in the cinema language. The beginning of cinema, when new art forms are created, they tend to imitate the previous form. So cinema turned to the stage. They stuck a camera and they filmed actors on a stage. So the connection of cinema to theater is there in drama. There's a relationship, it's an extension. The documentary form was really a break from that, where we realized that cinema, filmmaking, could deal with real life, and could deal with real life in the way poets deal with life, in a potentially more direct relationship to the material. Smaller crews, there's an intimacy with documentary. You can go to make a documentary by yourself if you want to. So it's like having a pen and a paper. The early French theories, the camera stylo, the camera pencil. You're writing with a camera. So this idea of being able to have an intimate relationship with a camera and be able to tell stories without having to raise millions of dollars, having stars and writing scripts and having people vetting your scripts. So it's a medium, for me, that has a lot of freedom. It has freedom and also a complexity. It's a very difficult form. The real life is very recalcitrant. You're always trying to understand it. You never understand it. The films that I make are not definitive. I don't see a documentary as making a definitive story with a beginning and a middle and an end, which drama tends to have. There's the happy endings in Hollywood. So for me, a documentary is, at least the way I make my films, they have a beginning, they have a middle, and they have the future. The third part is open-ended. I don't really draw conclusions at the end. Even as a kid, I didn't like when I saw the end. It's the end. It sounds like death. So it shouldn't have an end. It shouldn't end. Documentary is a conversation. It's a conversation in a moment of time with a confluence of people interacting, filmmakers interacting with real people, coming to certain ideas and conclusions and experiences, events, whatever it might be. And when the film ends, the film has to stop, it has to end, but the conversation has to continue. So I set up my film so that it's an ongoing process, so that the film is the actual film is doing this, but when the film stops, there's still a movement. When you say art and politics, I don't really separate those two. I mean, as a filmmaker, I'm making films in a way that I have a particular approach and style and way of making films, which is the art of making. But I'm not consciously making art. I'm just making documentaries, you know, in a sense. I'm not thinking about it as an art form, but you know, the politics, some films are more political, directly political than others, but I think all films have a political element. You know, if you're engaged in issues that are, you know, not being looked at by the mainstream, then that's a political, you know, process. I mean, politics can have a negative impact on art. I mean, if you look at, I mean, if you think of, you know, art in the state, you know, you look at, you know, the impact that Stalin had on art in the Soviet Union, very negative impact, you know, limiting artists and so on. You know, and art became dead, you know, as you know, trying to you know, so I think that, if as a filmmaker, if you're trying to make art, you're going to fail. And if you're trying to make politics, you're probably going to have a higher chance of failing too, in some ways. If, you know, I'm going to go out and make a political film that's going to have this impact, it probably won't have the impact you think it's going to have. You know, I've made films that I thought were going to be controversial, and films that I didn't think were going to be controversial, and the ones, you know, that I didn't think were going to be controversial were controversial, and so you can't tell how the impact of the film when you're making a film, or what effect it's going to have, or how people will interpret that film. You know, I mean, the current film Arctic Defenders is about a political process. I mean, it's about the politics of Inuit taking control of their lives and going through a political process with the, you know, Constitution, Canadian Constitution, repatriating the Constitution, all that. So I mean, it's directly about politics, the political process. So it's one of the most directly political films that I've made. So, you know, I'm making a film, and I'm making it the way I make films. Is that an art? Whatever. It's about politics. The support for documentary is really dwindling right now. You know, whether it's just a slump, you know, that right now, I don't know. But you know, television itself is under threat, like journalists and newspapers. The internet's having an impact. So I you know, it's difficult to you know, to know what the answers are. I mean, you know, it's in a conversation like this, you know, it's very complex, you know. So I can just sort of talk about, you know, these larger pressures, and you know, right now it's just that broadcasters are just less interested, particularly in the one-off documentary. You know, the feature length, or, you know, I mean, there are still places to do that. Obviously, I'm making films, you know, that, you know, using television and so on to help fund, but it's diminishing. Maybe, is it going to change? Maybe it'll change. I don't know. I think that's important. You know, where are we going to get support for intelligent documentaries? You know, not lowest common denominator reality shows, you know. What's going to encourage a more intelligent programming? I mean, you look at what happened in newspapers, where somebody like Rupert Murdoch and the dumbing down of the newspapers industry, you know, to schlock, you know, that's beginning to happen in television. So I don't know how you reverse that. But I think that, you know, like Cinema Politica is, you know, introducing films within the university realm for students, and engaging students in documentary and ideas. You know, maybe there's a relationship between universities and funding of documentaries. I mean, the university is supposed to be the place in society in where you are free from both commercial and industry influence for the exploration of ideas. You know, you can call that an ivory tower, but that's its purpose. You know, academics should be free to explore ideas free of pressure from government and business. So that's where documentary should sit. Documentary films should be sitting in a place like a university where there's complete freedom without pressures on one side or the other in terms of what kinds of ideas that are being explored. So I would like to see universities universities publish books of ideas. I would like to see the universities, the relationship between the university in terms of potential funding. Is that a place where we can bring in a foundation, for example, to work with the university to, with Arctic Defenders, we're working with academic component, or we're putting the academic research expertise on the website to complement the film. So there's a relationship with the university, so I think that's where our intelligence lies today, is within universities. So I think that's what I'd like to see is more a link and a relationship between the university and documentary makers. Cinema Politica is really, they've gone to the absolute core of what documentary is all about. And that's getting films to audiences, live audiences, and creating a condition in which you can discuss. And as I was talking about earlier, that a film doesn't end. It continues after the lights go up. And that's the core of what documentary is all about, is engaging audiences. And then if you can have the filmmaker there to respond and to interact, or the subjects of the film, that's what the core of documentary is all about. So they've gone directly to that core. And they're starting to get creating these networks globally. And I think in the last 10 years, they're celebrating 10 years anniversary. They've done an incredible job. It's just, two of them, Ezra and Svetla, they're working away. And I'm very, very impressed. And I think it's absolutely the right way to be approaching documentary.